All right, we are now live. Welcome, everybody, one and all, to Talking About Survivor. I am Christiana Ellis.
And I am Mike Mateen.
Tonight we're talking about Survivor Worlds Apart, Episode 3. I suppose we can just jump right in.
All right.
So right at the beginning, we have the understandable fallout of Will's decision last time. And while I don't personally dislike him for voting out Vince, because I didn't especially like Vince, it's understandable that Joe and Jen and Holly would be concerned that he did not do what he said he was going to do.
Yeah.
Resulting in, what, from their perspective, the wrong person being sent home.
Right, and even if they were ultimately okay with, just like we were, with him being sent home, they were in agreement or fine with Will's decision this time, but at the same time, like, you don't want to be hooked to somebody who just decides what they feel like doing and doesn't tell you.
Right. Right, especially if it's someone who's also not necessarily that great in challenges and so on. You know what I mean? It's one thing if he's doing something like that from a real position of power, but to really just throw a monkey wrench in the works because you can't be trusted to do what you say you're going to do, we can see why that might be a concern to the allies. One of the things that Dalton Ross wrote in his recap that I thought was amusing is observing that after that whole discussion, Will had said everyone else is playing checkers and I'm playing chess, and Dalton said, and so it is revealed that Will is a terrible chess player. Yeah, because at the same time that you get rid of the threat early on in the game, episode 2, when he's also one of the people who's strongest in challenges, which your tribe is already suffering at, and in doing so you alienate your allies. It's like, yeah, it's not ideal, not ideal. So in any case, also not ideal is Nina just declaring to the others, I know you're just going to vote me out next, so will you at least just act like I'm not an outsider until then?
Yeah. She didn't do herself a whole lot of favors in this episode.
No, definitely not. I mean, while just like last time, we can kind of empathize that, she's struggling to fit in, and I don't think it's entirely related to her deafness, but surely that's, it's in the mix. And we can empathize that that's difficult, but it's also difficult for everybody else. I mean, nobody's in their comfort zone there, really. That's the whole point. And so you really kind of have to be able to adapt to whatever the situation on the, the facts on the ground, right? This is not a situation that is catered to individual players. The whole point is that you are supposed to be able to deal with whatever situation is presented to you. And so if you feel like something is not turning out in your favor, probably spending all your time complaining about it is also not the right outcome, or not the right approach. Because I couldn't help but wonder when she was saying all that, it's like, what had she? I guess she had just really given up the game altogether at that point.
I guess, yeah.
The only thing I can think of short of that is the idea that she's just playing a massive guilt trip, which I would also think of as very ill-advised. I can't remember the last time that's been an effective strategy, especially when, again, you're not necessarily in a position of power. It's like, what are you offering the tribe in exchange for them putting up with you? Um, mm. So again, it's like we talked about last week. If we want to try to judge who's being a nice person in these various social circumstances, we could suggest that maybe some of the others are not being as empathetic as they could have been, not being as considerate as maybe they could have been. They're also playing a competitive game. They're not necessarily obligated to make sure she feels like part of the team any more than they feel like it's to their benefit to do so.
Right.
Maybe it would have been to their benefit to do so if they would lead to them having a tribe that functions better in challenges.
Yes.
Because that obviously didn't go very well. But that's a little bit later in the episode. At this point, she's just enacting a self-fulfilling prophecy of telling them that she knows that she's the one to go, and then just she's playing the pathetic card of just be nice to me until then, which is really off-putting. You know, it's like even if it wasn't true, it's the sort of thing that makes people want it to be true anyway. Like, oh, is this how you're just going to be now? Is this what we're going to have to deal with if we keep you around?
Yeah.
Now, that said, it's also possible that if they really were sincere in reassuring her and then didn't vote her out, then maybe she would have relaxed a little bit. But who can say?
Yeah, but it's hard to, like, when you're in that position to make that call and say, oh, okay, well, maybe she'll relax if we keep her another week.
Yeah.
The other thing that you could suspect that she might do is, like, be, like, so overly grateful that you kept her, and that's almost as annoying. Like, you know, just they don't want to deal with these emotional highs and lows, and, you know, so.
Yeah. So we hear from Jen definitely getting annoyed by this behavior. They had tried to reassure her, partly, I think, if nothing else, just because it's frustrating to deal with someone like that. Trying to, try to make her feel more welcome, but also feeling a little irritated that she's making it so much work. At that point, though, I was still also a little bit on the side of, tribe cohesion is to everybody's benefit, even beyond just being a nice person. So when Nina is making it very clear that she feels isolated, you could have some empathy to that and say, okay, well, maybe she would not be acting like this if she didn't feel isolated, so if we can make her not feel isolated, then she won't act like this. At least it would have been something worth trying, but then again, maybe they feel like they had been.
Or they weren't willing to put the effort required.
Right. Again, it's like, what is she offering in exchange for them taking the extra effort for her?
Right.
Meanwhile, over at White Collar, Shireen is awfully excited to be watching monkey sex. Now, I think everyone can understand, especially if you're already kind of bored just hanging out at an island already, that you might want to watch such a thing just out of curiosity. But at the same time, everyone else hearing about it from her is not the same. And she was clearly not reading the situation well.
No, she did not pick up on the cues of the social cues they were putting out there.
Yeah.
How they felt about her story.
Yeah, she, first of all, it seemed like she woke them up, although it might have been that they were just kind of napping, like they had already been up and they were just kind of resting or something. But either way, it seemed like they were resting and she was bothering them, and they definitely gave her the, oh, really? Yeah, okay, sort of disinterested body language and cues, and she just was so excited.
She just kept telling the story.
Yeah, yeah. Had to spill all of the details. No snuggling afterwards. So obviously, I think everyone is starting to be a little bit annoyed by her. I guess she's just a talker generally. Carolyn, in particular, is not impressed by her story. She and Tyler are both pretty annoyed at what she's doing.
Yep.
Yes, so that was an interesting counterexample to what Nina was doing in terms of just being annoying, but like almost in the opposite direction of her assuming that they were way more into her than they actually are, as opposed to like the reverse.
What was weird about it is it didn't feel like she assumed they were more into her than they were. It felt like she just didn't care.
Hmm.
You know, not that she assumed everybody's going to be so excited. She's just like, I don't care if they're excited or not. I'm going to tell them this story. That's what the feeling I got from it was, which was the same as like when she just decided to take her clothes off. Like, I don't think everybody's going to feel I'm okay with this, or everybody's going to feel okay with this. I just don't care. And that's not necessarily like a good, because that's what leads her to, at least in my mind, to not pick up on those social cues, like, because she just isn't interested in them, you know?
Yeah.
Which is not a good strategy for this game, to be disinterested in how other people feel about you.
Yeah, see, I guess I have a hard time. You might be right, but what just feels strange about that is it just seems like dumb. Like, if she's aware, then what's the benefit? I mean, like, what is she getting out of it if she actually knows that they don't care? It's one thing for her to not care that they don't care, but what is she getting out of telling them the story if she knows they don't care?
I don't think she knows they don't care. I don't think she cares if they do or don't care.
Oh. So it's more about... Okay, so it's more about she's so into the idea of herself telling the story that she really just doesn't expend any effort to detecting whether they care or not.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's why I felt like that made sense, like when you think back to like her getting naked and like awkwardly like preparing things in front of people. It wasn't like she thought everybody was okay with it. It was that she didn't seem to pay attention to whether they were or were not okay, because she didn't seem to be interested in whether they were or were not okay. It was, this is what I'm going to do. I'm not even interested in other people's reaction to it, so I'm not going to assess it one way or the other. That's how the feeling I got. I may or may not.
How is that different from just being unable to tell, though?
It feels to me more deliberate. Like the way, at least that I heard you describe it, is that it wasn't that she was unable to tell, is that she was reading it as they would be interested and not able to see that they weren't interested, because she was just defaulting to they must be interested. And I'm saying it's more of a not even paying attention.
Yeah. Well, you might be right. See, I read it differently as more of an assumption that they were more like her than they actually are, as in, I'm excited by this, so how would they not be excited about this? Everybody should be excited about this because I am. Not because I am, but like, if I am, then why wouldn't everybody else be also? You know what I mean? Like her just assumption that everybody would find it as interesting as she did.
Okay. Yeah, now you're starting to come along. I think we're now, coming to the same line of like thinking, because the way I heard it described earlier, the way I felt like you took it is, these are my really good friends. They love everything about me, so they're going to love my story.
Mm-hmm.
Like you were saying that everybody was more into her than she thought, as opposed to, just her being so excited and assuming that they would also be excited.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you're right. is there really a difference between not being able to tell at that point versus not caring? Not really. You know, where I was thinking is I don't think that she thinks everybody thinks she's awesome and is so interested in the things she has to say.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, like I was thinking it's not so the way I said it was really just trying to contrast her with Nina in the sense that Nina's default assumption is that nobody likes her, and that's the only explanation for why they are treating her the way she feels like they're treating her, as opposed to Shireen, whose default assumption is that people are interested and like the same things that she does.
Yeah, that makes more sense. Okay.
Anyway, though, let's see. Where are we?
I assume you're petting your dog with your left hand.
Oh, yes. So weird. Yeah, so, yeah, I've got a little dog here on the floor, so it's just...
Yeah.
Anyway.
Because otherwise, this is sort of like, I didn't really know what you were doing.
Yeah. Anyway, we went over to the Blue Collar Tribe at that point, and Dan, interestingly enough, has maintained a little bit. He's got his mouth a little bit more under control than initially, meaning he's managed. Seems like he's integrated into the tribe a little bit better than he had at first, but still acknowledges that his mouth is his best and worst characteristic, and we mostly see it as worst in this context that, although maybe he's managed to put a little bit more of a filter on it than he initially had, he's still occasionally going too far, including prodding Rodney about, like, name-calling his mom, which clearly doesn't go over well, but then also kind of digging in deeper when it's clear that Rodney is pissed.
Yeah.
Which, again, just like, why would you do that? It's one thing if you're just joking around and then someone, you discover that you've hit a nerve, although, again, like, with the type of person Rodney certainly presents himself as, it's not terribly surprising that insulting the other person's mom would be a hot button sort of thing. Although that also seems like it's by the same token, it's like a it's almost like that's a friendly sort of joke.
Yeah, but at least I didn't get the feeling. I felt like he misfired with it, regardless of who was on the other end of it.
Yeah.
Which allowed Rodney, who probably felt that misfire and also is predetermined to, like, jump on anybody who, like, makes a mom joke.
Mm-hmm.
He knew he could get away with it because it wasn't. It just didn't flow right. Like, it felt meaner.
Yeah.
Than, like, joking. I don't know. It's hard to explain. Like.
Mm-hmm. No, I get it. Yeah, it's one thing if it's between two good friends and it's part of a good-natured ribbing back and forth. It's another thing if it's maybe already a little bit tense.
Yeah, like, it basically felt like, it didn't feel like, say they were out there and, when the guy said, man, Rodney said, wow, our shelter is ugly and not put together well. And he was like your mom. That's not what it felt like. Like, it basically felt like, fuck your mother.
Yeah.
And I know it's not what he said, but it didn't quite click into
No, I agree. It didn't go over well, but I was almost less concerned with a joke that was received as more offensive than he probably intended it. But also, when it becomes clear that the other person is now actually mad, like, that's when, if you're not trying to offend them, you say, "Oh, sorry, I was just joking around. I went too far. Sorry about that."
Yeah, that's how a normal thing would happen. Like, you would say, "Hey, look, me and my buddies, we make mom jokes all the time, and it just came out, and it wasn't meant to offend you, man. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I will respect that from now on. I apologize. Like, that's
Yeah.
all he had to
Mm-hmm.
say.
Yeah. So anyway, that argument leaves some tension in place, and then of course we get Kelly, who I think we haven't really had a lot from her so far, but she's a cop, and she went to this whole anecdote in her confessional about how cops don't always rush to stop bar fights, which I'm not sure if I like that. People get hurt in fights. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think anybody would appreciate the idea that you're calling the police because there's a bar fight and they're taking their time, because sometimes the fights will just play out. You know, like,
Yeah.
what if you have someone permanently injured or killed because the police didn't come as soon as they could have?
Right. I agree with you 100%. I'm hoping that what she meant was different than like how it like came out. Like if she meant if you're at a bar that already has like, and maybe I'm giving her too much, leeway, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not that like a bar calls the cops and says we've got a fight, you need to get here, but like it's a bar in an area where there's already police presence because there's a lot of bars, and
Mm-hmm.
there becomes a shouting match and a scuffle, and that's what she's referring to as a fight, and you kind of you observe and let that play out if it can, and then if there becomes something physical, you step in. Maybe I'm giving her too much leeway because I do know that that is the case. Like you do,
Mm-hmm.
if people are just kind of pushing and yelling at each other, she's right. You might just let that simmer down because
Yeah.
sometimes the presence of like police or authority or all that is just going to make everybody's get more amped up. At the same time, you are 100% right that if there's actually a physical fight going on, the police need to get there and break it up.
Yeah.
Because
All it takes is
once,
someone gets shoved and they fall and hit their head the wrong way, and now they're dead because you didn't stop it sooner.
right, or it escalates, and once everybody's tensions are like lapped up like that, that's when you never know. Like somebody then, hits somebody with a bottle, or decides it's okay to, break a piece of glass and like go after somebody. Like those things all of a sudden the semblance of like what's okay can go away when those tensions are up high. So
Yeah.
yeah, they better fucking break those up if people are like pushing and like fighting, you know. So I'm trying to paint it with a little bit of leeway,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah, I'll also say, obviously I'm not a cop. I don't know exactly how it works with what they're doing day in or day out, but I certainly the way she described it did not make me feel good about that whole situation. Listening to her story, like even if we want to say give her the benefit of the doubt and that she didn't mean it exactly the way she said it, I feel like she needs to work on saying it better then.
yeah, I mean I agree. I'm just trying to make it not sound like cops just let people fight it out because that
Mm-hmm.
makes the most sense,
Yeah.
Because she could have meant a million things. Like she could be describing that, well, we don't start arresting people. Maybe they step in and let
Mm-hmm.
it calm down without like throwing people in jail, and is trying to liken it to this situation, so she's describing it in a different way. But now I'm just making excuses for her.
Yeah.
You're right. The way she said it is bad. I just don't want to believe that that's really what happens.
Yeah. Well, I would also definitely believe that there was a big chunk of she's there in the confessional and she's talking about how there was tension and someone said, "So, how would you deal with that if you were, as a cop?" And like that sort of thing. You know what I mean? Like, so they were maybe prompting her to try to draw a parallel even when she might not have otherwise. Who knows? But yeah, again, even still, just the way she just told the story, I would hope that she gets someone talks to her about that afterwards.
Yeah. Because reality is this isn't like a bar fight.
Yeah.
Take whether that's a terrible thing for a cop to be saying, it's not a great analogy in the way that she described it. Because they're not fighting with each other in I mean, what it sounds like what she meant was they're having irrational arguments because they're in a heightened state, and she just doesn't know how to say it that way. That's like a bar. That's like a bar argument.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're amped up. You've had some drinks. You get into disagreements that you wouldn't normally get into.
Yeah.
Fair analogy. Bar fight, like actually like going after somebody. That's not what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe that's what she meant, is people in a shouting match versus actual physical altercation.
Yeah. That's why
altercation, like a cop.
That's why I gave her that original benefit of the doubt, because that's more like what their current situation is. But anyway, so.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, over back at the No Collar Tribe, Jen and Holly do some body surfing with conveniently perfectly shaped driftwood. I guess it's possible that they found driftwood that was just exactly the right size and shape for them to body surf with, but that seemed weird.
Again, I'm going to go to the playing the devil's advocate, giving them the benefit of the doubt. They are there for a long time with not a lot to do.
Yeah.
They could identify those pieces, because all it would have taken is one of them to find one and be like, wow, this driftwood's like a bodyboard, and then the other one could spend 4 days looking for it for the other one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we would never see that. I don't want to think that they were I just don't. It wouldn't make me feel right to think that the producer somehow gave them these things to.
I know it does seem implausible. I guess I was just stuck on trying to imagine what kind of piece of wood would look like that.
What it looked like was like the things on the sides of the palm trees, just like a really big piece that had come off, like the casings, basically.
Well, it was rounded on the bottom.
Yeah, like the side of the
palm tree. What it might have been is if you have a big thick tree, and then you're trying to cut it into flat boards, and you're cutting off the rounded edge.
Oh yeah.
Maybe that's what it was. Yeah, that could make sense. So anyway, they do some body surfing, and I don't know why people take this game so seriously. It's well, you're probably not going to win then.
You're going to in about 48 hours or whatever. When they went to Tribal, they took it a little bit more seriously.
Yeah.
Wait till you're actually not in the majority.
Yeah.
See how seriously you take it.
Joe, meanwhile, is relieved that Vince seems to have taken some of the paranoia out of the game with him.
As well as a viewer.
Yeah. Although I couldn't help but think that the only reason that there wasn't still paranoia is because Nina was right in how she felt in terms of feeling like everyone is kind of against her. It's different, I suppose. It's not that same sort of a distrustful, confrontational paranoia like Vince had. Yeah.
And I decided this episode that the mild enjoyment I got out of watching this awkward guy on TV versus how actually awkward it was, I'm glad that he is gone. I don't need that this season.
Yeah. It was interesting to see it for a couple of episodes, but yeah. In any case, he catches a lizard, and so everyone else is going to have fun eating little bits of lizard. Although he tries to check in with Nina and reassure her. We get from confessional that he has personal experience with deaf people, and he's trying to bond with her. And I think that although I don't doubt any of it, I think to a large extent that was Survivor priming us to be okay with what was going to happen. Which is to just kind of try to make the case that as much as Nina might say, it's all because I'm deaf, we want to have some credibility for the other side of saying, it's really not it's not about that, except that you kind of keep bringing that up.
You keep making it about that.
Yeah. And especially just given that he has some personal experience with deaf people, it gives him more serious credibility in terms of him being able to say, listen, while it's certainly true that some people might have a hard time knowing how to talk with you and work with you, given this, I do have some experience with this, and I can tell you what you're doing. I can understand why you would, but that doesn't make it more fun for us. And there's discussion at this point, too, in terms of her feeling like everyone else is more of a free spirit than she is, like she doesn't want to try the lizard, for example, and is she on the right tribe? Should she have been on the white-collar tribe? I don't know, maybe. I'm not sure she would have gotten along better over there. I don't think they would have put up with that sort of attitude any more than the no-collar tribe did.
No, and then we have her whole confessional of, I used to be white-collar, but now I'm so no-collar. The lizard thing, I mean, they brought it up enough times. I don't know that it would have changed it, but it might, like, they were called, at least the way we saw it, and maybe it didn't, I don't remember it well enough to whether it actually happened where they were saying it to her, but whether they were talking about it while it was happening, I felt like they were saying it directly to her. Like, come on, you're on the no-collar tribe, you got to try new things. And she still didn't do it. Like,
yeah.
I felt like at that point, just try, just do it. Like, get out of your comfort zone and try something. Like, I felt like that would have gone a long way, especially when, you know, with their distrust of Will, like, if they didn't have this other thing to be like, well, she doesn't fit in, it's not about being deaf. Like, for example, her deafness didn't prevent her from sharing and trying the lizard. Like, she doesn't feel like a part of this tribe.
Right. It became this sort of little miniature tribal bonding, team-building activity that everyone else was kind of into. And then she just refused. Like, they were actively encouraging her to join them in doing this. And this was not a case of excluding her. This was a case of them saying, come on, do this with us, and her saying no.
Excluded herself in this one. Like, she isolated herself in that little instance. And the reality is that's all they needed was something tangible to say, you know, she's definitely isolated. She's right. She says she feels isolated. She's correct. But it's not our fault because we don't appreciate deaf people. You know, that guilt thing went away the second that she didn't eat that lizard, honestly. Not that it would have worked, but as soon as she doesn't do that, everybody feels totally okay with it because, hey, and I agree with them. That was her decision to not be a part of the tribe in that instance.
Yep. Meanwhile, over at White Collar, we have Max, Shireen, and Joaquin still out looking for the idol. That's always kind of amusing in any season when we have people doing a lot of idol searching and there being even drama related to that when we know that it's all pointless because someone else actually has the idol.
Yes.
In particular, after looking all day, Shireen is like, well, let's make a truce and not look for it anymore until the challenge. And then Joaquin and Max are like, well, yeah, you're the one that's already been looking more than anybody else. Why should we agree to stop just because you're tired? I thought that was kind of entertaining. The one thing that I thought, I can understand why Carolyn is sort of enjoying the relaxation, knowing that they're working so hard when she actually has it, but she probably should have done at least a little bit of looking too, just to keep up appearances. I think Tyler, even once, you know, even though he knows about it, he did a little bit of looking. So, you know what I mean? It's like if there's a lot of searching and she's just hanging out and relaxing, that tells one of two messages. One is that you either you have it, and so that's why you're not looking, or two, you're just not that invested in the game. Neither of those is really going to be the right approach, you know? Like, if nothing else, it's a good opportunity to bond with someone of just saying, I don't know, could it maybe be over there? No? Wow, it's really hidden very well, isn't it? Let's share our frustration of how hard this title is to find. You know? Like it's could be a team building thing, whereas she's just kind of, I think, gloating about it, which is probably not the best long-term approach, although I'm not going to give her too much of a hard time about it, given that it was her own initiative that led her to find it in the first place.
Yep.
Let's see. Joaquin, in particular, seems to be the most annoyed by Shireen. And at one point, he tries to blame her for the paranoia in the tribe early on, which I didn't follow his logic.
No.
I mean, at first, when he said that, I was thinking he was talking about the lie about the deception or honesty at that first choice that they had to make, but that wasn't her. That was him and So. Oh, but Shireen was the one that maybe called them on thinking that their story was BS. Maybe that's why.
I thought Carolyn was, but maybe.
Could be. I don't know. But in any case, he's clearly emotional about it, and Shireen kind of enjoys that he's emotional because that means he'll act out of emotion. Although, again, it's an example of something that's not necessarily a bad instinct, but it's probably not the right time in the game to be acting that way. You know, especially given the whole thing about, you know, we haven't even gone to the challenge yet. We don't know that we're even going to tribal council. We don't know that we're going to go to tribal council. We're still early on in the tribe's part of the competition. There's no benefit really to alienating anyone on your team. I think it might be more of a case of when you realize someone is mad, you try to come up with a reason why that's a good thing.
Yeah. That sounds about right.
Joaquin, on the other hand, decides he's going to show the clue to Tyler, who appreciates it. And, of course, Tyler is just thinking, like, oh, hey, I'm getting in good with all sorts of people now. I know who actually has it, and I have someone else who's willing to share a clue with me. Then over at Blue Collar, we have Mike continuing to rub people the wrong way, although there's a little bit of weirdness, because at first it made it seem like it was just Mike and Rodney, but then some of the others got in on it too, in terms of I guess he was sort of telling everybody that he didn't think they were working hard enough, but it seemed like there was maybe a serious case of someone's only working if they're doing what he told them to do when he told them to do it, and if they're just doing something else unrelated of their own initiative, then that doesn't count.
Yep.
There was one point where he was talking about his dad, where he just phrased it in a weird way, where he's talking about his dad being a pastor, but he's saying, the man that I call dad is a pastor. And I'm like, the man that I call dad? That's just a weird way to say it. I don't know, maybe I'm reading more into it than is necessary, but it just seems like such an odd phrase. Why wouldn't you just say, my dad?
Sometimes people use more words than are necessary. That's
true.
You know.
I can relate to that. But in any case, Mike doesn't seem to be getting along with people very well. Like, it's one thing, you know, we've talked plenty of times before about how there's that whole dynamic of it's hard to know, like, if you are on a tribe and you really feel like important work isn't getting done, because people are being lazy and more work really needs to be done, but you don't feel like you should have to do it all yourself. Like, that's a valid concern, and yet I think you would want to have to err on the side of not alienating people. Like, what's really more important in the big grand scheme of things?
No, and it really came down to, I felt like our discussion last week about it was dead on.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of them are taking this from, what I was talking about of what I feel like is more of a truly blue-collar mentality is not working 24/7. It's working till you're done and then being done.
Mm-hmm.
And he's bought into this hyperbole of we're the blue-collar tribe, we're the hardest workers. If we're not always working, how could we be the hardest workers? Like, that's how his logic string works. And it really felt like that's exactly what was happening, because the rest of them were like pissed off that he was calling out their work ethic and not, they weren't trying to spin anything. They were basically saying, we did all of this, and now we're done. Leave us alone. Why didn't this count,
Well, that was definitely like the argument with Lindsay really made it seem like it's really his definition of working hard means do what I say. Not, like, if he's not paying attention to what you're doing, then none of it counts. And so for her having that whole argument about, like, tending the fire and cooking and we're doing all of these other things that you're just not paying any attention to. So the fact that we're not carrying wood, and he's like, well, when have you ever thanked me for getting the wood? And first of all, they could rightly make the point, it's like, when have you ever thanked us for tending the fire? But then they also just point out of like, well, we thank you every time, and he's like, oh, well, And then although it was certainly a mean-spirited thing to say, and maybe not great in that regard because it just clearly, again, it was pushing a button that maybe didn't ideally need to be pressed, but the whole line of, did your God come down and make the fire with his beard? That was pretty funny.
That was really funny.
At the same time, though, he then, that's the point where he goes off to sulk in confessional, and that hurt his feelings on a personal level, and decides that people don't like him because he's a Christian, which really irritates me when people act like that. It's a little bit like what Nina's doing, you know what I mean? It's like you feel like you're not getting along with someone, and so you decide that something that you consider part of your core personal identity, that's what they really don't like, which makes it not your fault. It makes it them unreasonable.
Yep. That felt very similar.
Yeah, so that's not super fun. We also have Rodney as another example, though, of someone who, while we might even agree with his position, is perhaps responding more aggressively and confrontationally than is really necessary. Like the one point where he's just sort of defending himself in terms of, like, I'm doing all this, and then when I'm doing it, it's kind of like what you were saying, is like, I'm going to work, and then when I'm not working, I'm done. I don't need to just do stuff when you say to. And I thought he was making some very reasonable points, but he was also just really making it in a really aggressive, confrontational way of, like, you're not my father sort of thing, which makes it personal. And again, it's like, we can understand why people might feel the instinct to respond emotionally like that, but it's also, again, it's creating tension within the tribe rather than trying to work with the other people.
Yep.
But so anyway, that brings us to challenge time. The leaky bucket challenge. I kind of like these. They're pretty simple, but it's effective because it's just it's the sign of a good challenge when what you need to do isn't complex, but you just can't it's impossible to do it elegantly because there's just too many things to pay attention to, and so it just becomes a judgment challenge of like, well, how do you try to have people manage it? You know what I mean? It's kind of like, do you move slower and try to keep less from draining out? Do you try to just move quickly and make more trips? You know, how do you? And it's all kind of a judgment call on the fly.
Well, yeah, there's a ton of it on the fly, like because you're like holding some holes and you can't ever get them all, so you're trying to, like, how much time do you spend like continuing to like readjust on the holes versus just like you said, just get it from point A to point B and get it in there. Because every time you move holes, you're just that transition time, like some's coming out of the other one, so
yep. It reminded me a little bit of a science project that I did in high school, which was called, it's a Lorentzian water wheel, which is really, if you just like imagine a Ferris wheel where each one of the little cars is a cup with some holes drilled in the bottom, and then you have water pour into the one that's on the top. And so as it gets fuller, it'll cause the wheel to turn, right? But then as each cup has some holes in it, it'll also drain out. And so the basic idea is it's a demonstration of like chaos principles, because at a certain low enough flow rate, the water will just drain right back out. The cup will never get heavy enough to make the wheel turn. When it's a little bit higher, you'll get it to spin in a consistent way. But then at certain flow rates, it'll start becoming inconsistent, because if the cup is so heavy that it spins all the way around, starts going up the other side before it drains out, then you might actually have the wheel start to turn in the other direction, and then at that point the direction and pattern of the wheel's movement, it becomes unpredictable. And so
so nerdy.
I read about it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, that's.
It's a high school science fair project, though. That's what they are.
Yeah. But I actually made it, and it worked. It was pretty cool.
That is cool. I'm teasing you.
Yeah. I was a fan of chaos theory because of Jurassic Park, which makes it even nerdier. Anyway.
Well, but it made chaos theory cool.
Yeah.
Jeff Goldblum was cool.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, so anyway, I think you can imagine, though, why this challenge made me think of that. So the reward is for comfort. If first place gets like chairs and pillows and tarp and blankets and stuff like that, whereas second place just gets the tarp, still pretty handy. But of course, third place, tribal council. And during the challenge, the biggest mystery, of course, was just why is Nina not participating with the rest of the group? Hang on.
Yeah.
So yeah, like at that point, we're just with Jeff of like, why is Nina not doing, like, by running away and separate, like, unless she is just really slowing the motion of the bucket down, you fail to see any benefit, because it's two less hands plugging holes and lifting the bucket. Like, why is that beneficial? It's not like they're noticeably faster without her there. So it just really made no sense. And, of course, it made no sense to Probst either, which he pointed out on multiple occasions.
Yeah, I can't see what they were doing. I mean, I know Joe tried to explain it and take responsibility, but I still, even in his explanation, didn't get it. Like,
yeah, yeah, it was a bad call, and at the same time that I don't want to put it all on Nina either. Like, I'm not sure why she agreed to do it. Although, I don't know. At that point, it's hard to say, like, are you if the tribe seems to make a decision like that, is it, what is your best move at that point? To try to insist to have it your way at the expense of possibly alienating people further?
Yeah, I mean, we can look back at it and say she should have insisted and participated. Mm-hmm. However, she is in a tough situation because it is literally a no-win situation for her, mm-hmm. unless the tribe is successful. Like, say for example, they still go to tribal council. Yeah. Well, now how obvious is it? Like, we didn't want you to be a part of it. You insisted, and we lost. It's mm-hmm. on you.
Yeah.
Versus not being a part of it and them saying hey, we didn't win because we couldn't trust you to be a part of this. She was in a really tough spot. So I do,
Yeah. Yeah. So that's hard, and it's also, I like Joe generally, and we had the earlier bit of him talking about how he has experience with deaf people to kind of brush up his credibility in terms of making us trust what he is saying about how Nina is acting. But then, this was kind of he seems to acknowledge it afterwards, not just that it was a bad strategic decision, but also that just on a personal level it was kind of a shitty thing to do. He kind of seemed to acknowledge that, but it's also again, you just sort of want to try to figure out well, what was it he was thinking? How did he really think that was going to help? Because it really just, yeah. Anyway,
because you're in a competition, so the reality is, it doesn't matter if you're just moving a little bit faster than the other teams. If they're able to carry more water, you literally have to move twice as fast or whatever X percentage faster, because you have already defaulted to you're gonna get less water there. Mm-hmm. That you've from the beginning you have admitted that less water will end up every bucket. So you have to at least be one bucket ahead of them, if not more. And was she really that? Were they going to move that much quicker that they would be faster than the other tribes? No.
Mm. It was frustrating. It was a frustrating move. And yeah, so there's really no upside to any of that. It was a bad call, and so blue collar ends up getting first place. Despite the tension there at camp, they seem to be at least working as a team the best so far. No collar going back to tribal council, and so they go back to camp, and there's Joe taking the rap, as we talked about. Nina kind of also talking about how she had wished she had stayed in, but then they're all just basically commiserating and saying, yeah, we kind of screwed up as a group that time. But then what we can see is what becomes, I think, probably the defining moment of what happens for the rest of it, which is you can see Joe is obviously feeling conflicted, especially because of how he handled the challenge, but then Will just kind of comes up to him and says, look, are we playing Survivor or are we playing Friends? And it's well, yeah. Of course, it's especially in Will's interest to put it like that, you know what I mean? Just because it casts him as the reasonable one who's interested in playing the game well, which hopefully will shift the conversation a little bit away from the fact that he is also the person who you can't trust to do what he says he's going to do.
Right, because he's going to just do whatever he feels like. Yeah.
So it's casting, in that conversation, it's casting him in the position of being the one to say, come on, we know how to play the game, really, don't we? And so, and so really, as they get into the tribal council, the discussions of Will was really all about just him not being great in challenges. They didn't really even talk much more about about him not living up to what he said he was going to do.
Yeah.
So at one point we have Jen and Hallie and Joe and Jen and Nina as 5 seeming like they're maybe agreed to vote for Will, but it was Hallie and Jen at that point that seem more undecided about that. Although I think in hindsight everyone was a little bit, wobbly in terms of I think they were maybe all in the same boat of feeling like they want to have Nina gone, but they don't want it to look like it's because she's deaf.
Right. And there was that one consideration which I feel like they left out a part, which they start to do now, is if it's just like so obvious that there's a majority and they're going to split a vote to protect against an idol. Like, I feel like they clearly did that, and that's what the discussion came up. Because they were doing that, it really only required Jen to do something different.
Yeah.
Because Hallie or Haley or whatever was already supposed to vote for Will.
Mm-hmm.
Which she did.
Yeah.
And it also left, but where that worked out well for her is it put her in a position in tribal council where she could almost make a case for Nina and feel okay about it because she wasn't going to be voting for her, even though she was complicit in voting out of her.
Yeah.
Which was a little weird, at first when they're like, just say you're going to be like this, and and then then you can be a part of this tribe. And Nina's like, I want to be a part of this tribe. And they're like, thank you for saying
that. That was definitely what made me a little bit uncomfortable. Is maybe not the right word, but a little disappointed in the outcome. Not because I necessarily wanted Will to go, but just because it seemed like Nina was maybe finally at a place where she maybe could have turned it around a little bit, but it was too late, and given that it was too late, it's a little frustrating that they would make such a thing about how, like, encouraging her to try to make the change. Now, that said, it's also true that we should probably, even if you are sending someone home, you kind of would like to have them have a real understanding of why that was. To say is like, listen, we just didn't feel like, you're trying to make it like you're isolated because of this, but we're saying you're isolated because you're not wanting to participate in what we're doing.
Right. And that's why I also let it in this way, is to be a little bit fair, is that the one person who was the most encouraging of that conversation was Haley, who did vote for Will.
Yeah.
So she's a little bit protected, but she's also the one that brought it up to Jen and said, maybe we both vote Will. So she probably genuinely felt some of those things and was expressing them. And, yeah, it read weird and a little uncomfortable to those of us watching, almost like you tried to make her promise something only to know that it never mattered.
Yeah.
At the same time, I can see a little bit of it just seemed less mean-spirited or deceitful when I went back and kind of paid attention to how that all played out, because it really was her that did that, who seemed to more agree with that. Like, Haley seemed to really believe, like she was saying, Nina, if you had just been like this, if you had just said that 2 days ago, we'd be in a different position. But that's not really how she could put it. So.
Yeah. So there's some discussion about the idea that they didn't give her a chance, that they didn't include her in the challenge, that whole thing. But, Probst, of course, doing a good job of trying to stay out of the middle of it, but just pointing out it's kind of like, well, that's a two-way thing, you know what I mean? It's like we can say they made a bad decision in not trusting you, but they're also basing that on what they know of you. So you know, if we can still say that they made a mistake to do it, but it's also a mistake that's based on, you know, their perception of you.
Well, and we have already discussed that there's already a third way to the street, or maybe a bike lane or something, where she was also complicit in their decision and did not argue.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's, yes, they made that decision, but it was based on something that you had already done, and you went along with it.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a whole mix. There's a lot about people's interactions in this game that are complex and not easily reducible to any one factor about a person.
Christianity.
So, yeah. So there's some discussion about, you know, whether Nina should have been on the white collar tribe, like we talked a little bit about earlier, but I don't really know that she would have done any better over there.
I don't think so either, because partly there's two reasons. One is that she just didn't seem equipped to deal with this whole scenario, regardless of the tribe. And the other is that the reason I feel like she ended up on the no-color tribe is that part of her sense of a person, once she went deaf, she cast off like that white-collar world, like, this is my new thing, this is my new, this is who I am now, and this is now my new passion. And I don't know that she would have wanted to accept being on that tribe. And almost offended that they would put her on that tribe. Like, I don't think that she ever would have ended up on that tribe, because her whole sense of being is, yes, I was white collar, if we're going to use the terms of the show, and now I am not, because this has changed me, and I am no longer a part of that system. I am now doing this thing. And the reality is that she's somewhere in between. Like, I think they were right to point out that she wasn't truly a part of the no-collar tribe and willing to try all these things, like, because she's not naturally that kind of person. She's made herself that person based on her disability, which is why she makes everything about her disability.
Yeah, yeah.
So those are the two reasons why I definitely don't think it would have been any better if she would have even ended up on that tribe, have allowed them to select her for that tribe from the beginning. You
know, it's interesting that I think the biggest sort of arc we got from all three tribes really kind of boiled down to the common element of, you need to be able to read the facts on the ground and adapt to the situation you find there.
Yep.
You know, so we've talked extensively about Nina in that situation of, for example, like the lizard thing. If you see that the whole rest of your tribe is kind of having fun, you know, being a little bit grossed out but excited to try eating a little bit of a lizard, for you to be the one person who won't do that, you know, you can't complain about feeling isolated and then refuse to do the group activities. It certainly puts it on you instead of on them. Now, it may well be that you feel like the tribe culture is just incompatible with your own personality. Like, and that would be fair. But at the same time, that's part of playing the game, is you have to be able to integrate. And if you can't do that, then that says nothing about you as a human being, but does say that maybe you're just not very good as Survivor player.
Right.
And then likewise, we have Mike over at Blue Collar, who is feeling like everybody should be doing more work than they are. They should be, you know, dealing with the camp life differently. And yet he's the one that's insisting that everybody else should do it differently and do it the way that he thinks it needs to be done, instead of reading, this is the vibe, I need to fit in with that. And then, like we also talked about, is Shireen not picking up that people weren't interested in her story, that she is talking a lot with people not enjoying, and she's not picking up on them reacting that way to her.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the story that was told in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Was that these tribes are genuinely getting along, regardless of like what their affiliation is, but there tends to be one person who is just not meshing
Mm-hmm.
with the group.
Yeah.
I will say, kind of going off of what I described, it's the way that I see Nina, which I described there, which is that I believe that she feels like, she used to be this white-collar worker. She obtained this disability. That sounds awful, like she went to try to get. But she ended up with this disability and has cast herself away from that part of her life to begin this new life as this hearing advocate and this new thing.
Mm-hmm.
I liked the fact that they kept bringing up the lizard and that they really made her understand, as uncomfortable as it was while it was going on, knowing or not knowing at the time, but then seeing that she went home, her final words made me feel a lot better about all of that, because what it made me feel like what happened to her was, I used to be this, I left that, and I want to be this. But she realized she's really still somewhere in between.
Mm-hmm.
And they helped her see that, and she said it was life-changing, and that's what I feel like it meant, is that the reality is, like, the core of who you are hasn't changed yet. You've only sort of tried to change your preferences.
Mm-hmm.
And to really be over here, you have to do things like try new things and get out of your comfort zone and not take your disability as the reason why you're isolated from people, and maybe you have to take a little bit of initiative.
Mm-hmm.
That's my hope, is that's what she took out of it, is that sometimes you have to put yourself out there even if it's uncomfortable, and that's the kind of person I was trying to be, and now I see what it takes to be that person.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I think, I it's perfectly fine. What I'm actually remembering is something from last week where we talked about her. It was the early parts of this same arc where she was talking about how she somehow thought that, like, the no-collar tribe is going to be more accepting. Like she's imagining
what a no-collar was in her head. Yeah.
Yeah, like this idea that, no collar, that means it's like, hippie, commune, feel good, touchy-feely, like she assuming that's what no collar is or means. And I just remember reacting immediately to that, of just like, I certainly would not have that, like, that's not the connotation it has for me. The connotation that no collar has for me is individualists. People who are not necessarily good team players, so they go off and do their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
So and although, like, even people with an artistic temperament, I mean, certainly you can sometimes have that sort of communal bonding flavor of that, but artistic people are temperamental and emotional too. It's like, so I just immediately, when she had said that, it just really was a flag to me that, like, she had a different expectation of what no collar meant, and that was coloring the way she thought her tribe should be acting.
Right. And I agree with you 100%. I feel like I said, I think the idea of what it meant to be no collar was something in her head that, again, using that, here's white collar, here's no collar in her mind. She was white collar, and she thinks she's no collar because she thought it was something different. Mm-hmm. This helped educate her as to exactly what it means to do that. So that's good. She understands that it's more than just everybody's just universally accepting, because the reality is everybody's still a human being. Mm-hmm. Like, despite what anybody says, like, there's still a tribalism amongst the subcultures.
Yeah.
It just happens to be that, like, counterculture or subculture, that is now your new tribe.
Mm-hmm.
That and only people who fit into your idea of that. So you're accepting within the parameters of what you've decided you're accepting.
Yeah, it's it's something we've talked about a couple of times in both on this season, but also on past seasons, where they divide the tribes up based on some archetype or other, right? Like whether it's been times where it's older people, younger people, or that one season where they did it racially, or class or whatever. Like those sorts of divisions. It's interesting because people play into those archetypes either consciously or subconsciously, and this idea of, are you trying to force your tribe into being what your preconception of that archetype is, or are you just saying, here's 6 people, how do I deal with these 6 people, rather than trying to force those 6 people into fitting into some other box which may or may not be a good fit. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that people can make in this type of season, is to get so fixated on, oh, we're the no-collar tribe or we're the blue-collar tribe, and try to be dealing with a hypothetical team that fits that preconception rather than dealing with the actual players that you're on the beach with.
Yes. So I guess I'll say at the end here is that I'm really liking how that's played out. Mm-hmm. Like I think we talked about in the first show, I was a little bit nervous about whether the show would make such a big deal out of it that it became like annoying and just beating us over the head. Mm-hmm. Well, they haven't. They've set that stage and turned everybody loose, and the contestants have decided how they're going to deal with these archetypes. And that's been fun to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, they still use the names, but Probst doesn't, drill everybody about, well, you're a no-collar, you're supposed to act this way, and trying to brainwash them into, like, what that archetype's supposed to be. Like, mm-hmm. They're just letting it ride. And I've been really happy with that so far.
Yep. So, I think that probably does it for this time. We've had a couple of people coming in and out of the viewer, although I only see just the number of viewers, so I don't know if it's one person who kind of comes and goes or other people or whatever, but the number has fluctuated some. So in any case, if you watched any of this, thank you. And remember, if you missed part of the show, the whole show will be available on YouTube in video, and then the audio version, the podcast version, will go up on ChristianaEllis.com probably tomorrow night. And thank you for listening.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.